if I can give you an introduction, let Mike give you an introduction to himself, and why he's up here on the panel talking about the economics and things.
Yeah, I'm curious actually. So thanks to everybody for lining this session up. But I'm an investor, and I've got one job.
He's an investor.
I've got one job, to turn dollars, pounds, euros, RMB into more pounds, dollars, euros, RMB. And whenever I hear about big companies talking about the stuff you need to do to sell a product, it always scares me witless, because the startups that I tend to back are operating in that framework, but they've got to move way faster, otherwise they die. So, what I bring to this panel is perhaps the sharper end of the innovation around security, and how do you turn dollars, pounds, euros, RMB into more dollars, pounds, euros, and RMB before I die. That's me. Yeah, 10 years at Arm. Been investing now for about 15 years. Yeah, that's me. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Kay, and my background is in data science and analytics. So worked in 3 global consulting firms before, and most recently Schneider Electric. Really answering questions like how do we measure return on investment, like cybersecurity investment, using data and analytics. I now run my own startup, so I'm here, but I used to be on that side.
Thanks very much. So unless anybody else puts a question up, and I'm looking around for somebody, excellent.
It's a half-baked question, so I'm still trying to work out how to frame it, but the question falls on... Can everyone hear me?
No, you need to have the microphone for the recording.
Okay. So the question is more of a conversation starter around, you spoke around annual returning or reoccurring revenue being the future. Obviously, as a large IoT manufacturer or smaller, the model used to be just sell more units. What kind of models do you see these reoccurring revenues actually being? Are we aiming towards a more stratified system whereby only those who care / only those who can afford to have secure devices get access to it? Do you see it democratized in a way that everyone gets secure devices, but you get slightly more? I'm just be curious on how you see that developing.
Fine, Paul.
Okay. So platform as a service and software as a service will be the way that Siemens is looking at the future. Hardware is still a necessity. Faraday's law has not changed. There are still electromechanical devices that we want to sell. There are control devices. There are elements of automation that we still have to have that consistency with and competence with regards to the way that our customers are applying them. But around that is the value cell. And it comes down to what we were saying before with data. Data is the real value of the future. Productizing it, the hardware will still be there, but the added value comes down to the quality of value that you generate from the services around those particular hardware products. And that's where we see the accumulator in the future with regards to business. Hardware, still necessity, still has to work, still has to click and clack, but also there are the additional data that adds the value. It's then turning that into a resource. And once you can encapsulate that resource, that is your added value.
Other comments? Yep.
Did you want to go?
Yeah, after you.
You sure?
Yeah.
I don't mind if you go. Okay.
I said I wanted this to be a conversation.
Well, not a fight, right? We don't want to fight. No fights, please. It depends, I think. I think that when you look at existing value chains, you're hearing existing value chains and a view about how the world should be based upon big company thinking. The real disruptors come along and just ignore those rules. And so what we think the business models are, and the trap is just to fall into what you've heard rather than think about who's prepared to, when you think about old-fashioned trading, bartering systems, you add something I want, I have something you want, you trade it, that's it. Then we introduce money into the mix, and that kind of confused the situation a little bit. But the principles remain the same. You've got something I want, I've got the money, and I'm going to give it you. So I think when you're thinking about how you extract value, think about where in the stack you sit, think about what the total value could be for a unit of something. And if you're supplying a car, you're selling miles, aren't you? Driver miles, if you want to kind of oversimplify it. And then it's a question of how do you extract your value? And we keep talking about Elon Musk. You know, he's already there. I'm going to sell you so many driver miles a year, and it's going to be so many dollars a mile, and that's it, right? That's how you're going to buy it. So I think as a startup, you have to look at how value gets created, how that existing value stack looks, which bit of it can you legitimately try and take, and then you've got to go through all the treacle of corporates that are going to block you or enable you to get to that money, and whether it's ARR or it's licensing or it's a per unit model or a blend of all of the above. You know, when I look at startups, I look at how are they going to extract the value? Can they legitimize their role in extracting that value? And then do I think that team are capable of pulling it off? That's the bit. That's my world. That's my gamble. Is can this team pull that off? And quite often the answer to the latter is no.
I think to answer your question, I think your question is like, what is the best? Is a product or service a better way to drive value? But I would take your question as who drives the value, and whether it's a startup or your big company, it's the customers. So if my customers don't demand that, I will not spend any money on that. And so that's why a key thing, like in terms of making sure that security has a value, is to educate the people to demand that if you buy a house, you expect it of quality to not fall down. So why is it different when you buy a piece of software or hardware?
Jed, do you want to comment at all?
Yeah,
you don't have to.
No. Things as a service generally have, referring back to the automotive space, is really whether the businesses that are providing the services currently are ready to transform into that space, or whether they're going to just fall by the wayside because they were so ingrained in legacy methodologies and frameworks that they weren't able to transform sufficiently quickly. And that's a key system dynamic that higher order complex system organisations like Siemens Industrial Controls and those kinds of things need to anticipate for and plan for at board level, rather than say, we're operating our 2, 3, 4, 5 year business operation planning. Some of these transformations require much bigger level of investment than that to be ready for it as and when it appears. So smart cities in particular bring in those concepts, bring in the ability to transition socially from individual private ownership of vehicle to much higher reusability of vehicles, and by different people, and you have to be able to then coordinate the value that they get access to. Just because I delivered the service with a Range Rover Sport doesn't mean they get every functionality in there. That's a as a service function, which I have to be able to switch on and off on the fly, not I validated it because that work's done in Range Rover Sport and they've all got it. And it's that level of systematic control and capability and deconstruction that existing companies need to prepare for.
I'd like to give my smart city example here, if that's okay. No, I've got one. See, ownership of the microphone is power. Yeah, so we deployed a smart city capability into Mexico City to do all sorts of things. And it turned out that the most useful part of it was nothing to do with what it had been deployed for. It turned out that the sensors and things that had been deployed onto lampposts and things of that nature allowed you to determine there had been a gunshot, which meant you could send the police to the place where the gunshot had. It resulted in a 20% drop in crime because you got there, whilst the people were still on the scene and all the rest of the stuff. It wasn't part of why it was designed. It was an emergent property of the capability. I think roughly roughly 6 weeks after that was first determined as a capability, the adversary, the guys with the guns, learned how to hack the system to send the police to a completely different lamppost, so they could propagate their business in peace, as it were. And we then went into but the whole point about this is what means that the smart city capability in Mexico City is still operational and is offering this facility was the ability to do updates and harden certain parts of the system for what had now become a critical capability. Yeah. Had we not had the security attached to the sensors, had we not been able to actually develop that and harden that in the face of a shifting cyber attack in order to do that, then something that was saving lives, something that was actually generating value, and something which in Thales's case meant that we took another order of exactly the same size as the first one, as they suddenly discovered, would not have been possible. And I think that aspect of looking at cyber is not just about compliance. It was compliant, don't get me wrong, it complied with shed loads of things. And I think I've heard from Siemens on this one, examples of people have had to go to their funders. They've said, we'd like £10 million because we will generate this amount of upside against this. Yeah, that's dependent on understanding the regulations. So when Paul's saying he's got a 2-year problem with getting people to understand how these systems work so that they can apply the security to it and do all the rest of the things, that's the significant thing. They're not being asked to understand, what is in the CRA. They're being asked to understand how does the CRA apply in such a way that we don't destroy those kinds of steps forward, those kinds of value adds. And that's partly a data question, it seems to me, or a data question when I answer this overseas. This is partly a data question, but it's partly a product question. But it is absolutely, I guess for you guys, a question about is the regulation we're starting to see a jumping off point? Is this something that is just like I've learnt to play the piano? Yeah, doesn't mean I can play Mozart, but I've learnt to play the piano. Yeah, or is that an end in itself? And that really is the question here. Do we want to be driven by the economics of this, or do we want to be a compliance engineer?
Oh, totally economics, right? Because otherwise we can't pay for any of the things that we all cherish, like being able to drive around, freedom of movement.
And you're on the wrong panel if it wasn't that.
So I know. So that's why I'm here. Agitator. It was interesting because I always think about smart cities and then I just delete the word smart because I see no evidence of that. And actually I don't see a need for it either, which is a different point altogether, right? I think we instrument the cities anyway. We've been doing it for decades. We've been putting chips into things that people didn't even know had chips in them, right? So we've been instrumenting the world for at least 2 decades in my experience. But one of the most interesting things that went on for me recently, one of my portfolio companies did a trial with a large American finance company that provide finance infrastructure for different card vendors around the world. And one of their use cases was around EV charging. So there is a link to smart cities, Peter, you'll be pleased to know. And I am gobsmacked. Surprise for the non-Brits in the room. I was amazed, actually, that we're deploying EV charging stations that are totally vulnerable and attackable. And within this 30-day proof of concept that we did for this large American payment infrastructure vendor, we established there were 50 attacks on around 100 EV charging stations, just because we just picked 100. And I was amazed that we hadn't even thought that this was a threat. You're putting a cash machine in the street, basically, and you're enabling people to intercept it, pick up all the payment details of humans that go there and pay in good faith for their electricity. And I'm amazed in 2024 that nobody actually thought that could be a problem. When we lose billions a year on point of sale interference, I was amazed that we're in 2024 and nobody actually thought, well, that's just a point of sale device, right? That's all it is. So for me, smart cities are not smart. I delete the word smart, which is great because when you're a startup, you can go, oh, I've got a solution for that particular problem. And if you plug it in now, we'll identify all those threats and be able to do something about them. But as I say, I think that, unfortunately, the word smart is probably a bit of a misleading word in the word smart cities. But I do recognise that cities are getting smarter, but we seem to put really, really valuable equipment into the field, and then we expect baddies not to be bad. And guess what? Baddies are really good at being bad, and that's what they do. Anyway, that's a business model, by the way.
Can I just very briefly on the smart city thing as well? That I was trying to allude to that earlier on in the presentation. That in the whole spectrum of things which cybersecurity can contribute to the business management of, being clear about what you're capable of is a critical part of that communication. So there is a really, really solid benefit to a smart enabled city for transportation in increasing the throughput of goods and services in that arena. The average in London is 8 kilometres an hour. If you can move that up to 12, the amount of trade that you can conduct goes up 50%, and that's an astronomical number just in London annually, because you were able to operate the city more efficiently. But the things which cause that to be viable, we're a million miles away from. The investment isn't balanced across the patch. Some of the enabling technologies aren't there, and most importantly, the standards that will allow those things to happen collaboratively will inevitably have to be a staged deployment, so that will be certain routes, certain corridors, certain capabilities that enable a business level benefit to be derived will get turned on over a period of time if you put all of the elements together. And it's that complexity that cybersecurity, in my view, reflects really well in a disciplined way and enables that communication to happen.
Thank you. Are there any other questions before I start questioning the audience? Neil.
One of the best presentations I've ever seen at this event was from the guy
who mine.
Yes, you were second
Thank you.
So it was the guy who tried to hack Tesla when he was here a few years ago.
Yeah.
He spent his summer hacking Tesla. And the gentleman who spent his summer hacking Tesla. And I guess two things came out of that, which leads to the question. The big issue was that actually it was very secure, but then he drove into the Tesla parking lot and took over the factory because I hadn't sort of thought of that. And I guess question one is, do we have a problem as an industry of solving problems that don't, like spending a lot of time and money solving problems that don't actually need to be solved at a detail level? So for example, every part of every system on the Tesla, protecting it, but actually if you tried to hack it, the car just slowed down and stopped. So actually their security wasn't particularly deep, but the solution was very good. And I suspect that we're solving lots and lots of problems that aren't that deep or aren't, and yet we're missing the big picture, like Mike just mentioned. So A, is that happening? I think it probably is. B, what can we do to get sort of real people thinking about the real world and try and solve that problem for the next 10 years?
So does anybody want to answer that before I give an answer?
I would like to attempt that question. I think there's a bit of cynicism in that, and in that question, and I totally appreciate that. I think particularly for my realism, yes, but based on my the experience in manufacturing. So on the one hand, we are opening up all these OT that was isolated before. So you have a new risk landscape, like in cloud security and all that. And on the other hand, I'm still spending time fixing cybersecurity issues by engineers plugging in USB. So the fact that there are some some unsophisticated attacks happening right now doesn't mean that there's not another problem bubbling from somewhere. And it would take some time for us to solve the other problems as well. Talking about using data to measure the security posture, etc. One of the challenges is data quality. I think Paul from Siemens talked about that, is making sense of the data and processing them. That takes a long time. Like, people don't see that. So I think the question is, we have problems that are bubbling up, and we still have problems that has existed for the last 20 years that we haven't solved.
Anyone else?
I'll go. It's nothing to do with your question, just so we're clear. But it is...
Deception is a legitimate technique in cybersecurity.
I know. It's obfuscation. I'll keep hiding things. Where's the ball? Which cup is it under? A couple of things. I was recently involved in a private network implementation in the US, where there was a large car manufacturer that you mentioned, and the problem was that the private network around which all the devices in that manufacturing plant hung off had a problem. But the mobile network operator that provided the spectrum didn't know where the problem lay, and neither did Tesla. Sorry, not that company, another company that might sound like that company. And so they ended up looking at each other saying, we've got a security flaw, we know there's one, but neither the user of the facility or the provider of the service could identify where the problem lay. And this is a problem we're going to have when we connect more things into large-scale industrial manufacturing plants, which is, whose responsibility is it to find out where the problem lay, particularly when you're laying down lots and lots of firewalls to protect. Suddenly you've got a service provider providing the software to do the analysis that can't look into every single device because it doesn't have the permission to do it. So I think we're building more complex systems. Whether you drive a car into Tesla's car park and cause mayhem to their systems, for me, there's some real basics at the moment where we're not quite getting it right. But I don't know what the answer is, because everybody's looking at it going, you need to fix this. Telco, you fix it. Software provider, you fix it. And then somewhere in the middle is the car manufacturer saying, my machines are down. Come on, folks, fix it. But anyway, I don't know if you've got an answer to that one.
We've been there quite a few times, actually. I had a call upstairs, which is a very similar. So the biggest problem is that traditionally in automation, it was a flat structure. So you have a flat network. Therefore, if you impregnate that network, you can go anywhere within the network. So what happened with the guy that had hacked into that network is that very quickly the network was exposed. So defense in depth under that standard of 62443 starts to look at the way that you mitigate against those type of attacks, looking at the entry points and the exit points within the network. Qualification of data is another big area that companies just don't do. So effectively you end up with a single flat structure. There is no design criteria that's been built into the blueprint for the architectural design. And therefore, once it gets compromised, it's really easy to work your way around a network. There are lots of horror stories that I can tell you in food and bev that have had the same problems. It's right the way across industry. Only industry now is starting to wake up and become more mature in the way that they look at their supply chain. They, not only from the selection of products that they're going to be using on the network, but also the supply chain from who interacts onto their network. When we do either an active scan or a passive scan, generally an active scan, you will be amazed at the amount of connections from the network that are external, that the company has no idea exist. They're put in by the OEMs to extract data from their machinery, not informing the customer that this is an active connection into the network. And these have been on some really high secure systems. Forget the Teslas or whatever the automotive company was. I'm talking very senior customers that have open entry. And when you go in and then start looking at the endpoint, the action and the traction to the endpoint, it's 20, 30 seconds, and you're at the endpoint. And so we're back to, in the presentation I was saying, make sure you qualify your data. Make sure you understand the transition of data back to firewalls and presenting of firewalls and closed loop. understand that firewalls have to be parameterized. It's not a case of putting a firewall in and then just expect that it works. There are ways that you configure the firewall to ensure that the protection is built around that DMZ, but understand what's in the DMZ. And that's the problem. Flat structure, they haven't got a clue.
If I could chip in as well, if that's okay. You want to speak, Jed?
You go first.
Yeah. So it's always easy to talk about the one example, and you can always demonstrate from these sorts of things. So I'd like to give you a cyber example. This is a real cyber example of a financial services company that made their money by buying agricultural futures. They were persuaded by a cyber attack to buy agricultural futures 3 weeks before the peak of the market. Yeah, thus allowing their attacker to actually take the profits. Yeah, that's a fairly major attack. In fact, it almost took them out of business. The predominant cyber attacker on this were 11-year-old children. The predominant skill was lying about the geographic position of the soil sensors that were actually giving them the basis for their data. And the learning exercise for that was the tools that you use in order to lie about where you are on Pokemon Go, so you can pick up different. So essentially, there was a raft of trained 11-year-olds that were able to do that part. There was a single orchestrating mind, but the cyber attackers effectively didn't even know that that was what they were doing, were not prosecutable because they were below the age at which it was a very sophisticated attack, I have to tell you. It was propagated over several markets so that you only placed money, yeah, as the sun went down, as it were. If you go beyond a certain trigger point, yeah, then the financial markets kick in to say that's a big transaction, we have to look at that. And it was used to finance terrorism. So when you say yes, we can always use the examples, and I like to use the example that is always given of low-hanging fruit. Certainly in my garden, my experience is when it's low-hanging fruit, it's because the tree's fallen over and it's already beyond repair. So we don't really get an option to say how our attackers are going to go or not go. And one of the things I think is really that we should concentrate on, and we should make sure we upskill our security professionals to understand, is this is a game that is outcome based. You know, standing there and telling me what you did doesn't actually help if I got the wrong outcome. I know you won't be able to stop it always. I know you won't be. And part of what you were getting from all of these talks, I think, is you actually need to understand your subject matter beyond the cyber bit. You need to understand how to use compliance and things like that, how to use it as a vocabulary so that you can talk to other automotive suppliers or whatever, in the case of a 155 or whatever, so you get a common way of doing these things so you can start to build that industry skill. If you're talking about the CRA, yeah, areas where it's coming in are those where people actually know what they want to do with it. Yeah, yes, the European Union says it's got to be there for everything, but in terms of fluffy toys, I'm not quite sure what that looks like. In terms of factories, I've got a lot better because there are a lot of other regulations that are not security regulations, but are to do with, I need this timing, I need those sorts of things. And that's what it means to be doing cyber security. And that skill to be able to go, if I do this, if we do products in here, we can fit within that, we can provide the data, we can do all the things that we need. That's what I mean by this should not be on the compliance side. That should just be at your fingertips and stuff you know. How to use that to make money, how to use that to the advantage of your business. That's the bit that we really haven't concentrated on. If you go to any CISO, they spend their time telling you what a bad position you're in and all that kind of thing. They see it. There's no part of their business to tell you this is what you need to do in order to do that. I'll give you one further observation, which I got, I have to say, from my friends at NCSC, who observed that cryptography is the only technique we know for doing control at a distance. So you're kind of already into this. Every system I know that is a distributed system is control at a distance. You need to understand how that works and how you can do those to revoke. If you want to do DevOps, if you want to do minimum viable products and update them, that can't be done if you haven't put the right techniques in place. And then I can recover from the fact that the Tesla, in fact, they did recover from the fact the factory gets hacked. Yeah, and that's the really salient point, isn't it? You put in place an infrastructure that allows you to be adaptive. That's what you heard from the automotive industry. That's what you hear, to generate stuff that justifies, might give you money. You better be able to use that money effectively over a long period of time, not go, that was really good, and we got to the point we released the product and then it all fell to pieces because it turned out that somebody hacked us. So that sustainability, that long term, that is a skill that we haven't yet trained into people. And that would be my view. And I know I've just taken you over the time limit, Jed. So
that was sufficiently close to what I was going to say.
Sorry. And I'm sure we're all around, and if you wish to answer anything else, but I've got to the time I'm supposed to release you all, which is not quite consistent with me locking the doors and making sure you stay here. But if you have further questions, then my excellent panellists here, who I must thank, are all around still, I believe.
Yeah.
And I'm doing a run. No, I'm still around as well. So if we can answer any further questions, but I hope this has at least been an interesting insight into the way that I am very sad and see cyber security on this stuff.